Hello and welcome to the Untethered Consciousness channel. I'm Rod. I'm talking to you from Sydney in Australia. It's Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. If you are tuning in from the States, so it's going to be sometime in this sort of afternoon, early evening. If you're tuning in from Europe, I know it's going to be fairly late for you guys. Wherever you're coming from, thank you very much for joining us on the show today. I'll be very much looking forward to this conversation. We have our very special guest, Rick Pyle from the Astral Club, is going to be joining us. I'm going to bring him in just a sec. We had Rick on the channel, I think it was probably about 6 months ago. It was one of our most popular streams. So let's bring him in. There he is in the background. G'day, Rick. How's things going?
Pretty good, Rod. Looking forward to it.
All right. Well, that's great to have you back on the channel again. So there's going to be a bunch of, I say your people, so people from your channel will be coming over. I'll just pop this banner up. So if you, what I like to do is just get people to say hi in the chat. Let us know which part of the world you are from, because it's always interesting to know where people are coming from. We're streaming on YouTube and also on the Facebook page. So yeah, drop us a quick comment. And for those of you, people who may not have actually run into you before, Rick, can you just give us a quick intro of who you are and what you do with yourself these days?
Sure. Well, I have been astral projecting since I was a small child. And in that time, over the last 60 or so years, I have been doing quite a bit of astral projection to a variety of times, space, dimensions, and through our own present dimension, exploring and helping to spread spiritual knowledge that is a help to people, and to help others to learn how to astral project as well, which, as far as I'm concerned, is the greatest gift that I can give. So that's, Astral Club. I've been doing that now for about 3 or 4 years. I have well over 330 or so videos up there. Just everything from my experiences to just how to astral project and how to manipulate in the astral plane. So I'm just, my basic goal for the rest of my life at this point, other than my family, of course, is just to spread the word of astral projection and to help others experience this amazing process that every human, it's a human birthright, and that we've forgotten over the years. So I'm doing what little I can to help spread that knowledge again, and to help people begin to explore their own spirituality with astral projection as a big part of it.
Yeah, it's interesting how your channel, or just the whole subject of astral projection and out-of-body experiences has evolved. I remember when I first ran into your channel, I think you might have had like a couple of hundred subscribers at the time. It was really
That was a
early
while
on.
ago. Oh,
Yeah. Back when you first shared about it on Reddit, I think. And the most recent book I've been reading about astral projection, it was just a reminder that one of the things they said, which often isn't mentioned, is that people do leave their physical body every night when they go to sleep. So when we start sort of looking for ways to achieve an astral projection, it's a good reminder to go, well, we actually do it. It's a natural thing. It already occurs anyway. It's really just a matter of sort of tapping into that when that's actually occurring. That's the harder part.
Conscious astral projection. I use astral projection as a shortcut, but what we're really talking about here, and that's just certainly a word that you like a lot, is conscious astral projection. So that's the main thing here, because what we want to do is we want to have control over the process. We want to have an active memory of it, so that when we return to our bodies, that we remember what we experienced. And so that's a big part of the discipline of learning astral projection. It's the full consciousness, control, and memory of the experience.
Yeah. So I'm just going to do a couple of shout outs to some people that I actually recognize from your channel. Maverick Setsuno is watching. I think you were planning to rewatch that later. So thanks for dropping in and joining us. Saffronus, thank you for being here. Innate Self, I like the way you've done that, all those emojis there. Thank you for tuning in today. You've been trying to land on the astral plane. That is a bit of a play on words there, I think. All right, so yeah, you've tried oils, made flying ointments, still haven't been able to detach. this bit of a jokester in itself, I think.
Yeah.
Jana Kazar, hello to you as well. You're coming to us from Texas. Thanks for tuning in. A good friend, Lightning Rounds from Matthew from New York City. Thanks for tuning in. I thought you might make sure that you catch this one, although he does catch a lot of other live streams too.
He's been on the channel for a long time.
Yeah. And he's a really interesting person. Like, I like people who have these frequent, experiences, encounters with things that the rest of us can't really see. And it seems like that's just everyday life for Matthew, is seeing things that none of us are ever probably going to encounter for a long time. Yeah. Grace Frau, is that pronounced correctly, from Vancouver in British Columbia? Thank you for tuning in. We've got Abdullahi Amin. Did I get that right? Hello from DJ. Where is that? DJ, what's the...
That's Djibouti, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's Djibouti. Is that actually a play? I've never heard that one before. That's new to me.
It's a city in Africa.
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, I don't know if I've ever had anyone tuning from Africa. Thank you. Or at least nobody that's actually wasn't a lurker. Michael H says, Rick, help me astral project, as I'm sure he has many other people. So just a little bit of housekeeping. As far as the format goes, obviously feel free to talk amongst yourselves. If you do have a question that you'd like to ask, if you could just put a Q in front of your question in the comment, then I can then capture that, and we'll make sure that we get through all the questions. So I've got a few here lined up for you, Rick, so I might just start off with one of those. Now, on your channel, you've talked a lot about exploring the astral plane, and I know there are other dimensions that are beyond the astral and the physical. And could you give us a sort of a brief description of what some of those other dimensions are that you've encountered and how they differ from the typical astral plane?
Sure. I mean, there's dimensions that we can access, and then there's also planes that are very different. And sometimes they use the word dimension is used interchangeably. Let's cover both real quick. The physical plane is where we are right now, and we operate within a physical body, and that's how we operate on the physical plane. On the astral plane, it's vibrating above the level of the physical, which is why normally you can't see somebody on the astral plane. So it's a different level of existence that exists in the same space as our physical, but it exists at a higher vibrational rate. And so most of our astral projections take place on this plane. Now above it, I'm just going to talk about the one immediately above, is that mental plane. The mental plane, I've done a couple videos on that. It's a very alien place to us because there's nothing but thought that exists there. At least on the astral, you can have an astral body. You can also navigate around the astral because there's a variety of physical things, well, not physical, but astral things that you can see, and that it's easier to manipulate even with your experience in the physical. However, when you get to the mental, there's nothing, there's everything and nothing. It's nothing but pure thought. You don't have a physical presence, and very quickly you lose track of time. In the astral, you still have a sense of the passage of time. But in the mental, I remember when I visited there a couple of times, I didn't know whether I spent 1,000,000 years there or whether I spent a second. It's impossible. There's no frame of reference. And as I said, everything is just in thought. Now, when I use the word dimensions, typically I'm talking about dimensions. I'm using the theory that there is a multiple level of dimensions that exist simultaneously. Matter of fact, a virtually infinite number of dimensions. There's different versions of this particular reality. I've seen realities that were very similar to this physical reality, and I've seen other realities that were quite different, quite alien. They followed different paths historically. You know, maybe one person made a choice that they didn't make in this particular dimension, and that sent that dimension off into another direction. Think of it like a tree. You've got the tree trunk, but then you have many limbs that come off of that. The multiple universe theory states that we live on this tree, and that we have one particular branch that we follow on this dimension. But there's many others that are also existing, some of which, as I said, are quite similar to ours, some of which are quite alien. It all, it depends on how that history unfolded. Some don't have any humans on them, and perhaps in that reality, the humans never evolved. So there's nothing but, say, animals, for instance. And there's another dimension where World War III happened in 1983 and caused a very different physical reality for everyone. We luckily avoided that particular branch here. So that's a little bit about some of the different dimensions that you can experience. And then there's also the major plane difference. And you can go above the mental, but at that point in time, I've never been in the higher dimensions, or the higher planes. So I don't like talking about it. Yeah, sure, I've read about it in books, but I don't like talking about things that I haven't personally experienced. If you want to read a book, read a book. You don't need me to read a book for you. I try to share information that I've learned through trial and error and by visiting and exploring. And that's what I consider myself, an explorer. So exploring the various planes, exploring the various dimensions and time is what I, am interested in doing. And so that's what I'm doing throughout the planes and through the dimensions.
Okay. It reminds me of, in Robert Monroe's book, I think it was Journeys Out of the Body. Maybe it's the second one. He talked about how he discovered that he had two bodies. So it would kind of like, he'd leave his physical body and then he was his astral body and then he'd park that one as well and then go. So it was like a third body that he was using. Did you have to do that when you were visiting the mental plane?
Correct. As above, so below. This is very true. When I travel the astral plane, I'm leaving my physical body behind because the physical body is designed to operate in the physical. The astral body is designed to operate in the astral. When you go to the mental plane, you must park the astral body, just like you do with the physical, to proceed into the mental plane, because you can't go into the mental plane with an astral body any more than your physical body can visit the astral plane. So we have a number of different bodies which we use on these different planes. So yeah, when I went to the mental, I had I had a physical body parked, I had an astral body parked. So it's a very curious sensation parking your astral, especially for somebody who's never done it. And they might think they're a champion of the astral, but going to the mental plane is, it can be, like I said, it can be a very disturbing situation because there's no frames of reference anymore and there's nothing but pure thought. And, everything and all at once. And the true task is to try to bring that information back and then use the very clumsy English language to try to explain what you experienced on the mental plane, for instance. It's a little bit easier on the astral because we're closer to the physical. For instance, when people pass over, many times they pass over to the lower astral, which is a level that's very close to the physical. You might say that it's like the physical casts shadows onto the lower astral. And so you see a version of the physical, which is not quite the same. Just like the pavement in the summer, if you're standing and the sun's behind you, it's casting an image of your body onto the pavement, but it's not an exact replica. That's the same kind of process that occurs when you astral project.
Yeah, I find that fascinating that there's this, it's in the astral, the lower astral, it's very similar. And my one and only successful astral projection, it was still in my house, and a lot of things were the same. So I ended up in my bathroom, but there were some things that were different. So in my bathroom, like there was a mirror, there was the basin, etc. And to the left, where there was a toilet, there was a shower in the astral. So there was no toilet, there was a shower instead. That was the first time I realized where I thought, oh, I'm not awake right now. Like this is something different that's going on here. Mm-hmm. And then outside, like the street, the fence, the door was exactly the same to get outside. But then the street itself was completely different. There was no cars, there was trees, and there was a lot of things that were different. So there was some things that were similar, but some that were kind of like transplanted there and that more suited, it was almost like they suited the residents the people that were existing there better. Yeah. And of course, didn't need cars to get around, so everything was sort of catered for those who were flying or walking.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got a few questions here. I'll just a quick shout out to Jonathan from Sweden. Thank you for tuning in today. And Abdullahi is just confirming, yes, Djibouti is a country in Africa. Thank you for tuning in from there. So, question from Michael H. Some projectors report that astral residents tell them you're not supposed to be here, as if our presence is violating a rule of their world. Have you ever experienced something similar?
Well, there are, first of all, from my philosophical standpoint, I only go to places or do actions that I would feel comfortable doing or visiting in the physical. So if I wouldn't barge into somebody's house in the physical, I'm not going to do it in the astral either. There are places that you might say are private property in the astral. And if you're somebody who's not being respectful, you might be excluded from some other spaces too, because if you're not operating in a polite and respectful form, you can be asked to leave. But there's also places that are private, much like we have private places in the physical. You try to walk into a private golf club, you're going to be asked politely to leave because you're not a member. And that does happen on the astral as well. If I have had folks ask me to please go somewhere else, so I apologize and I go somewhere else, just like I would in the physical if I blundered into a private property that, and then the owner asked me to leave. I'd say I apologize and I'd leave. So yeah, it has happened. Not so much in the recent past, because I'm very sensitive now as to places where I can go and where I shouldn't go. New astral projectors sometimes are kind of like small children blundering around, touching the hot stoves that they were told not to touch. And generally the entities are pretty forgiving because they're used to, rambunctious young astral projectors, getting themselves into all kinds of situations and troubles because they don't know what they're doing. Part of Astral Club's purpose is to help people understand where they should go, how they should do it, how they should interact within the astral, and how they should be respectful to other beings that they meet there. Some of the things are something that anyone who's brought up with the proper manners should understand what to do and what not to do. But there's also some esoteric areas that aren't necessarily something that you intuitively understand. You blunder into it and then you're told, yeah, you're out of line, so please leave. So if you're asked, then leave. Simple as that. Yeah, but it has happened, sure.
I'm interested. I know you've had a lot of encounters with our friends, the Greys, or what's your understanding of how they exist in relation to the astral plane? Do they tend to sort of shift in and out of the astral just as a general sort of matter of course, rather than it being something that we find a lot more difficult to achieve?
Well, the Greys, there's different populations of the Greys, and there are certain populations that are a little bit more advanced than others. The typical Greys that I've interacted with exist towards the top of the physical plane. They're vibrating higher than we typically do here on Earth, but it's still in the physical plane. However, they can see into the astral. As a race, they have that ability, much like dogs and cats, which can see people in the lower astral, which is, if anyone's ever had a dog or a cat and the dog barks at an empty corner for no reason, or a cat seems to interact with nothingness, they can see into the lower astral. Even young children, for instance, can see sometimes into the lower astral. It's something about their sight at that age that they still have that ability. But it's like when we get older, our eyesight, we were just talking about that, our eyesight goes on us, our hearing goes on us. But when we were young, when we were little kids, they were sharp. And even scientists tell us that, they're very young, their eyesight is a little bit better. They can see a little bit different places than we can as adults. Not to mention, when we develop our logical minds, we learn to dismiss things that don't meet the laws of the physical. So we can tend to ignore things, but they have that ability to function in the higher part of the third, but then also see into the fourth, which is why I can interact with them. Now, there's other races that, like the Nordics, for instance, that I have visited, and they weren't able to see me. So every race is different. That's one of their particular talents.
There's a question here from, actually I'll bring up this one from Dylan, which is one that I have to, there's been a lot of talk about this, obviously, with what's been going on with interviews with Dr. Greer and the what's been sort of released as far as information about UFOs go. What's your view, or what sort of information what do you think? Let me just backtrack a little bit. I like to watch the channeling by Daryl Anker for Bashar, and Bashar, my understanding is he's a grey, which are like a genetic modification of humans from a long time ago, and he doesn't like to make predictions, and I'm sure, and I know you don't either, because everything is a possibility, right? But a very strong possibility seems to be indicated for some sort of open contact with ETs around, I think it was in about 4 years' time. So, yeah, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, first of all, we've had first contact with ETs for many thousands of years. As a matter of fact, they were involved in our genetic manipulation that made us into the beings that we are today. They started with more simpler life forms, fused with some of their DNA, and who knows, their genetic masters, creating the modern Homo sapiens sapiens that as we exist today. As far as with our present governments, they've been interacting one way or another. Either we've seized crashed craft, or there's been a variety of contact. The reason that we don't have, and there's more and more information coming out. It's almost getting to be too funny about the government just denying. They're even gotten to a point now where they're like, look, we can't confirm or deny, kind of thing. Wink, wink. The problem here is that our present governments like the status quo. Why? Because the status quo gives them power. They don't know what would happen in a world where suddenly we realized that we weren't alone, and that there were greater powers than the president of the United States or the prime minister of the UK or whatever. Of England. It's basically, it's just something that we're going to have to eventually come to some sort of terms with it. The leadership is going to have to be convinced to one degree or another to start really releasing this information. But as I said, first of all, somebody would have to admit that they lied to us for decades. And that's something that nobody wants to do. And then, like I said, they're going to have to surrender, a level of control, because all of a sudden people are going to want to know about these other beings and what their beliefs are. It might change our religions, which is also a major change in the status quo. So it scares the heck out of them. Not to mention, they're scared to begin with, because they're very much in that fear base where we have to defend against these aliens, and they've got this power that we don't have. So they're almost like children who hide their heads under the bed covers, because that way, if they can't see the boogeyman, then the boogeyman can't get them. I think they act very much like that, and it's. But there's no doubt that we've had numerous contacts. We actually have the craft, and I had an episode where I showed. I discussed what I saw when I visited a secret area of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where they've got 3 different alien craft. And some of our stealth technology, for instance, came right off of some of the technology that we found in the alien craft, which is why Sometimes they pop up on radar, and other times they just disappear from radar. It's almost like somebody flips a switch and they disappear. So there's no doubt. I mean, and our myths go back way past ancient Sumeria, where they talk about the gods and how the gods ruled over Earth, and then they describe these gods, and they don't sound exactly human. And of course, scientists today just dismiss that as myth, because if it doesn't fit the present narrative, then they treat it like it's myth. But our ancestors, sure, they had myths, but sometimes they talked about stuff that they saw. When they say Vimana, they're talking about flying saucers, and sometimes they're talking about exactly what they see. And we're doing everybody a disservice by making believe like, well, if we just cover our eyes and put our fingers in our ears, they'll go away. But when that first contact's going to come, I don't know, because like I said, the people in power don't see how it's going to help them to acknowledge that this greater force exists. They're pretty comfortable the way things are right now, because right now they're in power. So when you're at the top of a mountain, there's only one way to go, and it's not further up. So
Yeah, it's never made any sense to me, the idea that there is like some sort of existential threat. And it would be great, if the President of the United States said, yes, that we have had open contact with ETs, this is what we've been up to. That would be a pretty amazing day when that happens. But I also think it seems like the only time the times when there's more contacts and there's more craft being sighted, or they choose to show themselves, is when we start doing stupid stuff, like we start letting off atom bombs and things like that. And to me, that sort of indicates, well, there's something altruistic about them. They're interested in us actually evolving as a species, not killing ourselves, and that's when they actually show up. But it doesn't make any sense that if they wanted to obliterate us, well, surely they would have done that by now.
that's true. But also, I mean, I think we come from a very human-centric attitude. When we say, why don't they show themselves, or will they show themselves, or do they care about, what we do, or they care about the Earth, for one thing. The Earth, there are many millions, many millions, and billions of planets in our galaxy alone. But there's only a certain number of those that can sustain for any long period of time third dimensional life. So yeah, sure, they have an interest in humanity, but they also have an interest too in the biological diversity of this planet. The true wealth of this planet is not the amount of gold or silver or platinum that we have or that we dig up. It's life. It's the abundance of life. There aren't a lot of planets in our dimension that support this level of diversity in life, and so they treasure that life and its diversity. And yeah, humans are part of it, but it's very easy for us to get fixated on, oh, they care about us, that's why they don't want the Earth destroyed. Yeah, kind of, but they also don't want to lose the treasure that is the diversity of life here on Earth. And the Greys are very much interested in genetics. They see that as true wealth. And the destruction of life here on Earth would be a tremendous loss to our galaxy. And that's something that they're interested in avoiding, if at all possible.
Hello hello to Starry Astral. Thanks for tuning in from New York. I'll just do a couple of shout outs. Power Off. Must say, very pleased to see the face of the voice. Yes, I can imagine that would be. I think we got that comment a lot the first time that you appeared on the channel, Rick. Question here from actually Propagate This Light. I will come back to your. Oh no, we will do your question actually. Do we travel out of bodies? We sort of covered this. We might not have been tuned at that stage. Do we travel out of our bodies most of the time when our body is resting, i.e., sleeping?
When our body is resting, what often happens is the astral body will go a little bit out of coincidence with the physical. And what it's doing is it's recharging on the lower astral. And it's normally an activity that is done in the unconscious state. So you may have a couple experiences in your life where you wake up feeling like you just fell. That is a memory of your body that had been out of coincidence, however much, with the physical, rapidly being pulled down into the physical, and then you wake up because of the shock. So, just about everybody's had that experience at least once. And that is, just like I said, a remnant of the memory of that type of situation and experience. But it's usually unconscious.
All right, we'll propagate this slide. Hopefully that answers that question for you. Jonathan X, heading back to talking about ETs, what do you think of the goals and objectives of the reptilian race, Rick?
Well,
Are there different species there as well, like there is with greys? Are there some that are perhaps more altruistic than others?
I haven't had any personal experience with reptilians. I'm not drawn to them at all, so I can't speak authoritatively. I can't speak firsthand. I have spoken with the Greys, and I have eavesdropped, for instance, on the Nordics as reading their thoughts, and they both give the reptilians a wide berth. They tend to, from what the thoughts of the other races are, that they're a bit more antagonistic, and they're a bit more warlike, and they have their own reasons for being here on Earth, and they're not necessarily in the interest of humanity. From what I've been told, keep in mind, this is not firsthand experience now. What I've been told is that they have an interest in the Earth, and it would involve the disappearance of humanity. So they are not allies. They are a potentially hostile race, and they've proven themselves to be that way. But other than that, I don't. Like I said, I've never met with them. I don't have any desire to meet with them. So the information I have is secondhand. So take it for what it's.
I've been reading the Ra Chronicles, so the Book of Ra, the Law of One, a series of books. I don't know if you've read those. There's, I think, 5 in this series. Yeah, okay, great. They're really terrific, aren't they? And I think that was where I got a much better understanding of the different kind of motivations. There's really essentially 2 motivations. There's service to self and there's service to others. And they're both I guess, a relevant way of, going through from the third level vibration to 4th and 5th, etc. I think once you get to 5th, you've got to go service to others, otherwise you just can't go any further. But my impression of the reptilians, at least from what's been channeled in those texts, is that they're more oriented towards service to self, and from the ones from the Orion Belt anyway. And so when there are ET interactions that involve that particular race, they're often the terrifying sort, because they're interested in generating terror and sort of having people, because service to self means you've got to control others, otherwise you don't have any power at all. That was my impression. And then the Greys is a bit more the opposite. They're more like our, some of them anyway, more like our benefactors, and often the encounter with the Greys is more of a positive experience. And I think your own orientation, as you mentioned, your own sort of general level of vibration will determine who you tend to interact with. I think in your case, it makes sense to me that reptilians wouldn't want to even go near you, because your vibration would have a detrimental effect on them, just being in this sort of close proximity, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, that could very well be. I don't imagine we'd have a lot in common. Typically, if there's any negative experiences with the Greys, it's because they don't have the same emotional makeup that we do. They have kinds of emotions, but they're very subdued if you want to compare them to humans. So they get confused when humans react out of fear, and they have a hard time understanding that sometimes, and they do their best to try to calm people, but in their experimentation in the past, they were a little bit too aggressive with that because they didn't understand what the problem was. I mean, they weren't hurting the people; they were just doing, experiments or checking out genetics. Because like I said, they're extremely advanced in genetics. They're a cloned race, for instance. So they have quite a bit of experience in that area, and they're interested in us from that area as well. And if there is negative experience, it's because they have a hard time really understanding our emotional makeup, because we're extraordinarily emotional, whereas their emotions are very subdued. So sometimes it's just that they don't know what to do. They get a little confused because they don't understand. And I try to explain to them that what they're doing inherently, it can be interpreted as negative, even though it doesn't necessarily harm us physically. That there is an emotional component that that we experience that they don't quite understand, and so that's where the misunderstandings come from. The reptilians, and I've been told that they feed partially off of the fear energy, so they want to enjoy that fear. That's one of the ways they get fed. At least the ones that are a little bit more highly vibrating. Some of the lower vibrating part of their race, they they eat meat. Well, a lot like we. I think sometimes why we don't like the reptilians as much is they probably remind us more of ourselves than we want to admit. After all, I don't like using the words good or evil because they're extremely subjective terms. I like, the service to self, service to others is a little bit more accurate. But it's I think we're afraid of them because they remind us of ourselves. Because we're an extremely aggressive race. I mean, we've wiped out many millions of ourselves in wars. So for any peace loving race, they take a look at our bloody history, and sometimes there's maybe a good reason why they don't want to establish relations, especially with nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons, that's something that everybody in the universe, well, at least in our galaxy, respects to a degree. They respect the power of it. And it's also considered that we're slightly insane for using a power of the universe like nuclear weapons in a combative way. And let's face it, every technology that we've ever gained as humans, we figured out some way to make a weapon out of it. Sometimes I think that we shouldn't look down on the reptilians so much because we're kind of like them from a viewpoint. Certainly, we eat meat too, just like they do. So I think we should look in the mirror sometimes and see if we can figure out how to like what we see when we look in the mirror, instead of looking at another race and saying, "Oh, how bad they are." Well, the reason I like them is some of the reasons that people are a little hesitant to deal with humans, because we immediately go to fear, and then from fear we go to a combative stance, which is considered a primitive emotion. It's considered a lower race that reacts out of fear and hostility. And I hope we're getting better, but we still have a good amount of that we got to deal with.
Yeah, it's interesting perspective. Zuna, keeping the Loosh farm going. Yeah, Loosh is one of those things I know you've covered on your channel before, and I got a new understanding of, I think, Loosh. Although they didn't mention Loosh in the Ra Chronicles, but they kind of talk about that in a way that some races sort of feed off of Loosh, and I guess maybe one of the reasons why we wouldn't want to be wiped out is so that we can keep the Loosh farm going. So that's an interesting perspective. Starry Astral, otherwise known as Astral Tourist, I think is here. Thanks for tuning in. Big fan of the channel, and I think that's just innate self thanking you for the previous answer before. Angie Shimming, thanks for tuning in. Nice to. I love it when people get really enthusiastic and put lots of exclamation marks on their comments. Zuna, yeah, Grey seem like the managers of the Earth life system. They do in a way, don't they? My understanding is that they, or at least one version of them, came very close to annihilation, and they had to resort to cloning to actually keep their species going. But the cloning, like anything, if you keep cloning things, you end up with errors, and that doesn't work out. Which is why they've then had to introduce human DNA into our. And so I think that our relationship with them is a very important one that they'd certainly want to
Yeah,
keep going for that reason.
yeah, that definitely. It's a bit of a cloning is a bit of a trap. Yes, you can definitely control things better if you're cloning bodies, and because of their technology, they can actually take a personality when the body is dying, and they live around 300, 350 years, longer than us. But when they're near to, or that body's become too old, they can transfer into a genetically identical body, and so they get to continue with that consciousness. And But the problem is that there has been some genetic problems, because a copy of a copy of a copy, you can have errors starting to pop up. So that's why you get these different genetics. I'm also told that they also have a hybrid program going where they're combining human and their DNA to form an entity that can live on our Earth without any added life support equipment. Uh, the Greys, they need a certain amount of equipment, or they can last in our atmosphere for a certain period of time, but not for very long. And they're hoping that this hybrid program allows these hybrid entities to exist on Earth and to blend in with humanity. So that's been going on as well. And certainly, everybody realizes, if you've ever messed with genetics, you know that hybrids can often, if they're done properly, can be stronger than the original organisms were. That the sums of the whole are greater than its individual components. And since they are genetic masters, they certainly appreciate that fact.
Mm. I wonder if there are, well, I'm sure there are, but do you ever think about how many, if there already are sort of hybrids walking among us that really aren't sort of recognizable or unrecognizable from the everyday human being, but they've been created in a totally different way?
Sure. I mean, there are some that look too gray to actually come onto our planet, but there's others who can pass. They tend to be a little smaller than the average human, uh, and sometimes their eyes are a little bit further apart, a little bit more almond shaped than the typical human is. But if you were to pass them on the streets of Manhattan, especially on the streets of Manhattan, you wouldn't look at them twice.
Yeah,
And sometimes
yeah.
they're aware of their status, sometimes they're not. Uh,
I think it's the one who was very early abducted, who first started writing about abductions. His name escapes me now, and he witnessed a grey who was kind of like had a trench coat on and had the sort of
oh,
wide hat and the sunglasses.
are you talking about Are you talking about
Yes,
Whitney
Willie Strieber. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I
Uh,
read his book, Communion, when it first came out. I actually had to take the cover off and put it away, because just looking at that picture would freak me out, just from some abduction type experiences that I had as a kid.
yeah,
Misunderstanding what's going on and the fear associated with that. But yeah, he was also a contactee as well. Maybe that's a better term than a abductee.
yeah,
But yeah, sure. That was really, I think, the first mainstream New York Times bestseller of that type. So he was quite revolutionary with that book when it first came out.
yeah. All right. Well, we've got people are really getting in the swing of things now. We've got a lot more people in, and there's a lot more questions going through. So let me just see if I can get through some of these. One here from let's see, propagate this. Like in itself, I'll come back to your question because I think I've grabbed one of yours before, but I will come back to you. Can a human being actually be a reptilian or other? I guess that's the question. Do we always get reincarnated into human form, or do we have other forms as well that we could be incarnated into?
The vast majority of people who are currently evolving on this planet in human bodies will pick another human body for their next lifetime. There is a small percentage that move on to the astral and then the mental plane. Once you go to the mental plane, you don't have to return to the physical anymore, but you have to be comfortable on the mental. If you're not spiritually advanced enough, you won't even be able to get on the mental, and you'll still end up in the same reincarnation spiral. Like I said, there's a small amount that actually go ahead and they go on different planets, or in different races. But the vast majority that are here right now will have another human lifetime. It's kind of like if you ask somebody why they live here in the United States, for instance. The vast majority of them, if they think about it, will say, well, this is where I was born. This is my country. Heck, there's a lot of folks, especially in the United States, who don't even have passports. I know this sounds weird to Europeans and Australians or whatever, but, they don't even have passports. So the reason they're here is because they were born here and they feel the most comfortable here. And is there any surprise that given similar circumstances that they'll choose a similar lifetime again? Because it requires a lot of adjustment the first time you go into a different race's body. And in many cases, you seem like the odd duck when you pop up the first time in an alien body. You really need to be someone who's very daring, someone who's very much into exploration and doesn't mind jumping, blindly into the void. And there's a lot of people who think they want to do that, but when the time comes to actually make the choice to leave behind all the souls that you've made friends with, as well as leaving your enemies too, and to go to a completely new evolutionary sphere, if you're ready for it, sure, you'll be allowed to do it. But the vast majority stick with the conservative choice, which is, okay, at least I know with humans, I know what to expect. It's like the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. So there's a very small minority at any given time that choose to leave this particular Earth and go to another evolutionary sphere. And keep in mind that time isn't a factor. You can reincarnate on Earth in different times because they're all happening at the same moment, just in different energy levels. So you don't have to reincarnate in the 20th or 21st centuries. You can pick other times. There just needs to be a match with your vibration, and there needs to be an available body that you can merge with. And it's a little complicated how that all happens. But it's possible. But 99.9% of the folks who are here now will be here again if they choose to reincarnate next time in another human body. It might be cool to be a human-sized praying mantis, but it's a big adjustment. Okay, it's a very big adjustment that not everybody is ready for.
Okay, lightning round. This is a question that came from a couple of people. Haven't heard you talk about the Pleiadians. Rick, have you had any interactions with them?
I call the Pleiadians Nordics. Use whatever term you want. They appear much more human. And I visited their craft that was at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. As I said, they weren't able to see me, so I observed. However, I saw an Air Force colonel there, a full bird colonel, who was their Earth contact and was at their base working with them. So they're at least working with the United States Air Force. The males are much taller than we are. The females are kind of like Uma Thurman. That's kind of how they look. I wonder if Uma Thurman is an alien. I don't know. Her eyes are further apart. She's tall. But, basically it's easier for the females to just go among us because they're a little on the tall side, but not so bizarrely so. I mean, they're over 6 feet. I don't know how many meters that is, but uh, typically all they have to do is really hide their eyes behind some contacts because they have very strange eyes that they'll put in contacts, and they can also do some other surface things that to hide who they are, but they're very humanoid. And once again, you could pass them in Manhattan and you wouldn't look at them twice, you know, because a lot of them go to those kind of big cities. You can get easily noticed if you walk around a small town somewhere. But if you're in a big city, like L.A. or Chicago or Manhattan, for instance, it's a lot easier to blend in. And so yeah, I haven't had direct contact with them because they couldn't see me and I couldn't interact with them. Uh, I was able to read the mind of the Air Force colonel, but theirs was a lot harder to read. And I couldn't communicate with them. They couldn't see me. So I just observed what was going on. So evidently, they've got some sort of agreement with the United States Air Force. Uh, I wish they'd have said something when I was in the Air Force, but, I probably didn't have I had top secret clearance, but I didn't have that kind of clearance. So it's interesting.
Yeah, it is really interesting. Comment from Starry Astral. Love when I get all tingly coming back into the physical body. Yeah, I remember that as a young person. It's like that moment. I think it's like when your body gets frozen, and then as that disappears, yeah, that can be kind of pleasant. There's a question here from Mrs. Amy Starcloud. What a great name. What is the great purpose of astral projection? What do you think is the great purpose of astral projection? Why is it that we're able to do this?
Spiritual growth. In order for us to get to the next stage of our spiritual evolution, astral projection needs to be a major component of that because it allows us, while we're in our physical bodies, to gain this knowledge that we would otherwise would be unavailable to us. You can go to the Akashic records and do research there. You can visit other times and spaces, other planets. There's so much information out there that is beyond the typical human being here on Earth. That the astral really is, first of all, it's a birthright. It's something that we have neglected. We've allowed to atrophy like a muscle that you don't use. But it's very important to our continual spiritual evolution. In order for us to continue our growth and to get to the next stage of our evolution, we need to start bringing in this information from the astral. When you bring in this information, it's so much easier to deal with other people here in the physical, to deal with them peacefully, and to learn from them, and to help spread that knowledge that is required. Because the physical is fine for what it is. We gain a lot of experience by being in the physical, but we're still leaving a portion of ourselves to rot. So by astral projection, we are developing our spiritual and our psychic senses. We're regaining that ability, and we're going to take it to the next level that allows us to continue on our spiritual evolution. So that's the reason that I do it. Now, yes, of course, I have fun. I mean, I enjoy exploring. It's cool hanging out on a big ice rock in Saturn's rings and just kind of listening to Saturn sing to you with the radiation. That's a lot of fun, sure. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with just flying around the night sky and just enjoying yourself. But, the spiritual component is really the main reason why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm not running an astral tourism agency. Yeah, you can do that, have a lot of fun. But, the real goal here is to help humanity grow out of our physical blindness and realize there's so much more out there that we could be seeing and learning from. And astral projection, I see as a huge part of that growth.
Okay. Excuse me. Zuna _J5_9. Thank you so much. That's very generous. I really appreciate that. We've got a couple of questions here from that are related to the mental plane. So you are the father. What kind of activities or experiences could be had in the mental plane? And then Innate Self also asks, what's the best way to clean? Oh, sorry, wrong one. I'll come back to that one. Zana Kazai, how did you stumble upon the mental space dimension, and why would one go into that? So they're kind of related, those two.
I didn't stumble upon it. I sought it out, and the way that I was able to proceed was by increasing my vibratory rate through love to get to the highest level of the astral. And then I used my experience in astral projection to park my astral body and then proceed on to the mental. I have a mental plane episode, which I did my best to explain what I experienced. As I said before, though, it's always very frustrating because if it can be a little hard sometimes to explain the astral using physical language, because the physical language is designed to describe physical things. But the astral, it's you can still use physical language and get most of the accuracy that you need. The mental, it's a whole nother being. You exist in a timeless place. You're still you, but there's no longer a definition. There's no longer a border of what's you and what's someone else. You become part of this greater intelligence, and through force of will, you interact with other intelligences in this formless void where you exist, like I said, in a timeless manner. These are the best English terms that I can typically use to describe existence there. But even then, I'm grossly oversimplifying the experience. It's something that you could very easily spend the rest of eternity on the mental if you wanted to, because there's so much knowledge there. There's so many entities that you can interact with in a complete way. Just you can understand exactly what their experience is as if you lived it. And it's just all it takes is just a thought to interact with all of time and space and all the other beings that exist on the mental plane. But as I said, it's a very alien experience, but it's very seductive. If you can stay there for any length of time, it becomes harder and harder to want to come back. I try to stay grounded by thinking about my wife and my daughter. But if it wasn't for them, I could see very easily just staying there and just existing in a timeless way, just absorbing all this knowledge and all this wisdom. So that's pretty much what's going on there in the mental plane.
Michael H. has a question that's kind of related to what you just said. Was, do you intend to reincarnate after this life is over?
Well, I mean, once again, we're dealing with simplistic terms here. Keep in mind that all of your incarnations, you don't just have one, you have many that exist just throughout time here in this particular dimension. In the multiverse theory, there's many millions of you. For instance, Robert Monroe, in his parallel dimension, he discovered one of his cells. And because of that, he was able to merge with it for a period of time because the vibratory rate was close enough to his rate and his signature that he could actually do that. And I have done that as well for short periods of time. But typically what happens is whatever you need a certain amount of time, if we can use that phrase, to integrate your experience from the last lifetime. And the time periods differ based on, and really time, we talk about it like it's this animal that exists independently of us. And that in and of itself is a lie. It's a falsehood. All the time that's ever going to exist is existing right now. And certainly when you incarnate it, you can incarnate in the 16th century if you want, or in the 22nd, if you can find a body that will teach you the lessons that you need to learn. So usually, I mean, if you want to do this in a simplistic way. Once you've integrated your experiences, if you need healing, the healing that you got on the healing plane, and then you start, along with a guide, reviewing your next possible lifetimes, and reviewing the different options that you have, and then you end up picking one. Now, I know a lot of people seem repelled by the very idea because they say, well, I've had a hard time in this lifetime and I don't see any way I'd want to come back. But, when you're on the astral, just on the astral for a period of time, it's easy to forget physical senses. It's easy to forget unpleasant physical senses. You forget them like they're distant memories. So when you're choosing another body, you're choosing it with an almost analytical, unemotional choice, because it's like a distant memory now. When you first go through a physical illness, you feel awful. Oh man, I hope I never have to go through this again. But then years go by, and you almost forget how badly you felt. So it's a little bit easier to kind of put that experience into some sort of framework. And that's just something that happens on the astral. It's nothing that anybody means to happen. It's just that we very quickly forget some of the inconveniences and whatever that we experienced in the physical, because the astral is just a very different experience where you don't get cold, you don't feel pain. So these concepts become very academic after you spent any amount of time. So you end up making your reincarnation choices in a very cerebral way, just making logical choices.
All right, we've got a question here from Dylan. It's an interesting one. Have you ever astral projected into North Korea and seen what it was like?
I have no desire to go to North Korea, either in the physical or the astral. I've been in plenty of lower astral places where they're inhabited by suffering drug addicts who are trapped in the lower astral because their own addictions are keeping them there. But North Korea seems to me to be a place of suffering. I can't see any reason why I'd want to subject myself to that level of depression and sorrow. I feel bad for those people, and I hope that someday they gain the freedom that they deserve. But no, I have all of time and space and the Akashic records open to me. Why would I want to go? It's like, well, it's like it's time for a vacation. Where do you want to go? Well, I could go to Walt Disney World. I could go to Europe or Paris. But, I prefer to go to Syria because there's a war going on there. And that's kind of my idea of a vacation. Yeah, no, nobody's going to say that. No one's going to say that. And that's my attitude about North Korea. I suppose if I was Korean, I might do that to try to help souls that are trapped. But, they really need somebody who understands Korean culture to really help them. And I'd be out of my depth doing that, which is why I typically rescue people who are Western, from Western countries, because I understand the language and the motivations and the psychology, so that I can use that to effectively help them. To sit there and think that I could do that in North Korea when they've got an entirely different mindset. I don't even know if South Koreans could do it successfully, because their mindset's very different from the North now. But certainly I'd be out of my depth. So no, I've never gone there for any reason, quite frankly.
Okay, we've got a question earlier on from Innate Self here, which was, what's the best way to cleanse and purify the astral body? Or is it even necessary to do that?
Well, the best way, listen, the astral body, much like the physical, occasionally has blockages in it. And a blockage in the astral can sometimes end up manifesting in the physical. So the best way to clear any blockages is to astral project and to raise your vibratory rate, to absorb energy from the astral plane. And that helps to get the old astral juices flowing, which then has an effect, a positive effect, on the physical.
Okay, now we've got a couple of comments here from Ozman Ahmad. Made it for a short bit. Thank you very much for showing up. Now, your question is, if nuclear
Hi.
weapons can be created, can the opposite be created as well? It's interesting. Something to create harmonic convergence, an implosion of light and positive energy instead of destruction and emitting chaotic.
I mean, that
Think about that,
sounds
mate.
like a wonderful idea. It also sounds like something that's way above my pay grade. You know, I guess you're kind of talking like an anti-nuclear bomb. Uh, yeah, that'd be great. You're talking to the wrong person here. I don't, when I was in college and we thought the world was flat and dinosaurs still roamed the earth. So I don't necessarily have that kind of scientific knowledge. Uh,
Mm.
but yeah, I mean that'd be interesting, wouldn't it? If somebody could do something like that. And who knows what alien technology is out there. I mean, I've had the Greys try to explain to me their propulsion methods and showing me their genetic methods. And I feel like a 10-year-old being shown, a college physics book and being expected to understand. I almost wish I was a lot more technically oriented, that perhaps I'd have a plan or some sort of chance of understanding that information. Unfortunately, most of it just goes right over my head. I wasted my time with business and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I took the classes. I was able to squeak through with B's sometimes, but it wasn't necessarily my forte. So, yeah, who knows? I mean, my worry is that what you described could be used as another kind of weapon. uh, and, because, we humans, we're extremely inventive with our weapons. We always find a way to make something into a destructive device. So I don't know if that would be a blessing or a curse necessarily.
So, speaking of weapons and wars, did the Greys start out warlike? A question here from Anthony Logan, like humans. I believe that's actually how the Greys were at one point, which is why they had to resort to cloning.
Yes, yes. Many races go through their period of violence. Well, let me put it this way: the races that tend to be spacefaring races tend to have gone through uh, a warlike period. Now, a lot of them end up wiping themselves out, but the ones that actually continue end up learning their lesson and they become much less violent. But the reason I say the spacefaring races is they're curious. They're also technologically oriented. So they're more like us than not. I mean, there are races out there that are advanced that will never make a technological spacecraft because, if anything, they want to explore. They'll explore using astral projection. Uh, so it never occurred to them, or it never occurs to them to go out into space. For the most part, if we hadn't had a moon that was constantly staring at us 3 days away by spacecraft, I don't even know if we would have done it. And if we hadn't had World War II, I don't know if we ever would have gotten that kind of technology. The Nazis came up with their V2 rocket program, and then with Project Paperclip after the war, we took all the scientists over to help us with our rocket programs. But there's something about the races that go into space that a lot of times it starts out from a warlike standpoint, much like we started out. I mean, the V2 was a weapon before it was a spacecraft. So we share that in common with some of the spacefaring races. But there's other races out there, like I said, that will never create a spacecraft because they don't see any need for it. And they may not even have a technological society, but they're very spiritually advanced. But they're much more different than us. We would probably find them to be boring and slow. And we'd be like, well, why don't you improve things? Why don't you improve your standard of living? Why don't you get some factories over there and we can get more consumer goods going and what have you? It just, their attitude is, oh, we're happy. We're happy with what we got right now. And we don't need to improve anything. Uh, and they're much more spiritually minded than some of the races that we share something in common with, that are aggressive, at least in their exploration. And like I said, many times they started out in a lesser, more violent stage. And they somehow managed to avoid wiping themselves out. although they've had their ecological disasters, and and the ones that have survived have learned not to repeat that mistake. It remains to be seen if we can figure that out.
Yeah. Caldemus Avenus, I know you popped this question up twice, so I did see it. Don't worry. Thank you both for what you do and share. Rick, what is your perspective on the flat Earth topic from your experiences in the astral?
Yeah, I mean, I was obviously joking about that before. Um, I don't know what to say about that. I mean, 2,300 years ago, a Greek philosopher scientist computed the circumference of the Earth, and he got it right, with a very narrow degree, like 1% error rate. When I circle the Earth, I circle the Earth. It's a globe. It's a little chunky at the middle, much like I am, but it's round, and I don't know why I have to address this. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I just don't understand why I'm being asked these questions. I respect people. I respect their beliefs, but I'm sorry. I can't share that, because I have circled the Earth, and it's a planet. Circled the moon. It's a planet. Circled Saturn. Same deal. Mars. Same deal. So I think a lot of it comes from a misunderstanding of the Bible. In the King James Version, they talk about the four corners of the earth. But, that is a translation of a translation of a translation of a translation. And, and the Bible, it was also written, with a very poetic a way of writing, too. So, when we say the four corners of the earth, we say it meaning that all the extreme areas of the earth. Nobody actually, no reasonable person is saying that it's square. It's just it's a saying that one uses as a literary device. I don't know why you'd want to take that literally. And all it does, quite frankly, is it makes us here in the U.S., which seems to be the focus of this belief system, it makes us look even more primitive from a scientific standpoint. And quite frankly, it's a little embarrassing. So I'm sorry, the Earth's not flat. It's just not.
At least from your perspective, that's for sure. We've got a question from Millie Snages. I don't know how to pronounce that one. Could someone on the mental plane help your monk friend stuck in a black hole? You may need a little slight backstory for some people who aren't familiar with what's happened with your monk friend on that one.
That's a deep cut a little bit. Basically what happened was that I had an ally on the astral plane, and I called him the monk. That was my nickname for him. And he assisted me in a number of missions on the astral. However, there was a negative entity which had taken up residence in the middle of the astral, and it had attracted a following, and it was feeding off them to keep itself fed and on the middle astral, having control over those others, because it was very service to self oriented, and it ended up declaring war against the forces of light, and there was a war, and the monk assisted me in fighting this particular force. However, things came to a very bad conclusion when he assisted in trapping this individual in the universe's largest black hole. And unfortunately, he's trapped there for all eternity with this entity. And he was willing to sacrifice himself in order to contain him, which is one of the few ways you can actually contain a being like that. Normally you don't have service to self entities that are that powerful. They're much more rare than service to others who are powerful because of the inherent limitation of service to self. I don't know. The mental plane doesn't really worry about the physical or the astral. And when you get on the mental plane, it's hard to maintain those cares too. it's so easy to slip right into the mainstream of the mental plane and discounting, or at least de-emphasizing what goes on in the astral and the physical. It's just like somebody who's in college knows that they're still in elementary school and they may remember being there, but they're not really concerned about what's going on in that elementary school anymore, because that's elementary school problems. You know, you've got your college problems, and it's very much the same in the mental plane. For them, it's they have a much bigger viewpoint, and they don't concern themselves with what happens in the physical or the astral, for that matter. So you can criticize them if you like, but they could care less. I mean, they're existing on a whole other plane. They have a whole other set of priorities, and it just doesn't really include the physical or the astral. So asking that question uh, on the mental, there wouldn't be much of a response because they're not concerned with what happens on the astral or the physical. They don't see it as important. Um, and that is the way it is. The way it is.
All right, guys, we're going to wrap this up fairly soon. So if you've got any questions, drop them in. I'll probably go for another 5-10 minutes if you can stick around for a bit longer for us, Rick. I've got one here, interesting one, dinosaurs. I believe you visited Earth prior to the asteroid that wiped the dinosaurs out. Did they look like they are depicted today? Did they have feathers?
Yes. However, the first time that I went back there was when I was a kid. Like most kids, I was fascinated by dinosaurs. But when I was a kid, dinosaurs were depicted in claymation or in movies as these slow, clumsy reptiles. And they looked very reptilian. I remember the first time I went back, I was exploring through this jungle and I saw this creature that kind of looked like what I thought was a dinosaur, but it had feathers on it. And I watched it for a little while, and then it took off, and then I got pulled back to the present. And I remember writing in my, I had a school notebook at that point. I was just I was in elementary school at the time, and I wrote that I think I failed to go to see the dinosaurs because dinosaurs don't have feathers. But now obviously I'm aware of that, and I'm aware that I didn't fail, that I did actually see a dinosaur. And I also went back and I saw very large crocodilians that were sunning themselves right around 75 million years ago in a delta. There was this huge inland sea that divided the United States, and I was at the delta, and I saw these large creatures. They were crocodilians that were unbelievable large size, like 30 feet long, and that's numerous meters, but basically like 5 times the length of an adult male, put it that way. And they didn't have feathers. They looked very crocodilian. When you come up with a body size or a body plan that works, you tend to keep to it. That's why today's crocodilians don't look that different. They're just smaller. That's all. I did see feathers on the one time that I went back there and saw this particular dinosaur type creature. It may have been a young dinosaur too, and I think scientists think that the young may have had the feathers. Maybe they grew out of it when they got older. They're not sure, but they may have definitely had them when they were younger. And if I saw a younger version of these typical dinosaurs, then it would make sense that it would have feathers.
A bit like the way that humans are quite a bit hairier when they're first born, and then the sort of the hair disappears. Okay, we've got a question here. We've got a number of questions actually. I'll try and find. Oh, this is interesting. So, memory, thank you for tuning in. Can a blind person experience the same visual space in the astral? If not, could this mean the astral is just a personal mental space and it depends on our past accumulated knowledge to understanding it? That's a good question. Do you know anyone who's blind?
I had an interaction with a person who'd been blind from birth who astral projected. He didn't see on the astral. He was able to feel and to hear and to touch, and he absorbed information that way, And he negotiated around the astral using those other senses. Now, I think personally that he did have some visual stimulus, but since he was blind from birth, he didn't have a framework where he could properly appreciate that particular stimuli. It's, for instance, when you astral project, if you actually pay attention, you will notice that you can see 360 degrees around what's going on around you. But many new people don't observe that because they're so used to the forward-facing vision that they end up ignoring the vision that is available from behind them. And I think this particular blind individual just had no framework to absorb visual information, but he did understand, hearing and sense of touch, and he used those, and that's what he was able to explain to me of his experiences. So it's quite fascinating because before that, I'd never dealt with anybody who'd been blind from birth who had astral projected. So that it's a fascinating experience, certainly to how they perceive this astral reality.
All right, guys, we'll make this our last question. I'm sorry we can't get to them all. So this is from Grace Freya. Hi, Rick. Could you talk a little more about your Apocalypse Now episode? Is there anything other than desperate praying that we can do to help avoid war?
I always think twice about airing episodes like this because I want to share the information with people, and because it's necessary, and I think it helps people to prepare. But I always worry that they'll fall into fear, or that they'll end up, making that future that I see a reality because they fall into it and they end up making decisions that lead to that reality. It's like, does somebody really predict the future, or do they just come up with a likely outcome and then everyone else buys into it? And then we end up making that the outcome because we believe that. I mean, for instance, there is a fundamentalist evangelical Christian belief that the world's going to end in any 2 seconds now. So, for instance, they don't care about the environment for the most part because, well, Jesus is going to come back and it's all going to go away. So it doesn't really matter. You shouldn't concern yourself with clean water or clean air or the environment because it's all going to go away. And so if enough people believe that, then we'd end up making it go away because we wouldn't take care of it. So I'm always careful about this type of information that I share. I said years ago that 2030 would be a very different world than 2020 was. And this was even before the epidemic came along. And it's because I saw a lot of possible realities that had very definite change, economically speaking, in warfare, in disease. And it's not the end of the world, I don't believe, but I believe that we're headed into a period of violence, a period of, but it's also a period of renewal. I wish we could go into renewal without having to go into the destructive stages. If you look back at history, mankind seems to continually go through these periods where you go through a war, it's very destructive. Then you go through building up fences again and building up, alliances and enjoying peace. And before you know it, aggression kicks in again and you kick into yet another war. World War I was nothing but, the opening to World War II because of the way it ended. And we managed to avoid World War III 20 years after World War II. We avoided it narrowly because the Cuban Missile Crisis could have easily kicked off World War III. We've got clouds right now going on in the Middle East, in Ukraine, and in China. And any one of those areas could break out into World War III. What we can do, really, the individual, what you can do is live your best life, take care of others, take care of our environment, uh, treat others like you like to be treated. This is something that we can all do, because this is us establishing peace in ourselves and then helping others to experience that sense of peace and spiritual growth. What you can do to help others is to grow yourself spiritually, to grow your knowledge base, to experience astral projection, then to help others experience that so that we can get to a point where we can increase our ability as humanity, and make a better version of ourselves. That's what we can do. If you feel drawn to write your congressman or go to some protest or other, if you feel drawn to that, go ahead. Um, for me, it's about what I'm doing right now, helping in my small way others to grow spiritually, and to hope that others do the same, and so that we can become better humans than we are today. That's what I think we should be doing. If you're talking about just the average individual out there, because I know it's very easy to feel overwhelmed. It's very easy to feel like you're on this train that is now a runaway train and you don't know how to stop it. And so you feel powerless. But, we do have individual power, and we exercise it every day when we just interact with our fellow man, when we treat them with respect that we expect to be treated with, the love that we expect to be treated with. For me, that's what we do. That's what we should be doing. And I try to do that with Astral Club. So that's my advice, as best as I can relate it.
That's a great answer, Rick, and it's a good way to finish off today's live stream, I think, with a message for people as to how we can, in our own small way, improve things in the future. I really appreciate the time that you've taken today, and it was very nice to have a lot of your audience turn up on the Untethered Consciousness channel, and perhaps we'll have you back in another half a year or so to update us with what you've been up to and talk more about what's been going on in the world.
Sounds good. It's been a pleasure, Rod.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. I'm sorry I couldn't get to answer all the questions. I'm sure we could be here for 3 hours. Save them up for the next time. Or put them into a comment on Rick's channel, and we'll talk to you all again soon. Thanks very much.
Bye-bye now.